A 21-year-old girl sitting in front of a laptop screen, heart hammering in her chest, barely able to string two words together, and on the other side of that screen is the greatest tennis player who ever lived. That image alone should tell you everything you need to know about how extraordinary the last few weeks in women's tennis have been. Because what happened between Alexandra Eala and Serena Williams wasn't just a wholesome moment between a legend and a rising star. It was something far bigger, far more layered, and honestly far more emotional than anyone in the tennis world was prepared for. So let's slow down and really talk about it, because if you think this story is just about a video call, you're missing the whole picture. Let's go back to the beginning, because to truly understand what this moment meant, you need to understand who Alex Eala is and what she represents. She's 21 years old. She grew up in Cagayan de Oro City in the Philippines, a country that had never in its entire history produced a Grand Slam seed. Not one. In a sport that has historically been dominated by players from Europe, the United States, and Australia, the Philippines was essentially invisible on the professional tennis map. There were no famous Filipino names in the history books, no legendary matches tied to the country's flag, no cultural touchstone in tennis that Filipino fans could point to and say, "That's ours." And then came Alex Eala. She didn't just crack the door open. She walked straight through it, introduced herself, and started rearranging the furniture. At 21, she became the first player from the Philippines ever to be seeded at a Grand Slam tournament. Read that again. The first ever. In the entire history of the sport. And the Grand Slam in question was Wimbledon, the most prestigious grass court tournament on the planet, the one with the perfectly manicured lawns and the all-white dress code and the centuries of tradition. For a Filipino girl to be seated there, to have her name on that draw sheet with a number next to it, is something that will be written about in sports history books long after the tournament itself is forgotten. But here's the thing about Eala that makes her story even more compelling. She didn't stumble into that seeding. She earned it in the most dramatic way possible. In the weeks leading up to Wimbledon, she went out and won a grass court title in Birmingham, England, which was already impressive on its own. But then she went to Berlin and did something that made the entire tennis world stop and take notice. She beat Jelena Rybakina, the world number 2. And then, as if to prove that wasn't a fluke, she turned around and beat Elena Svitolina, ranked 8th in the world. Back-to-back, 2 top 10 players, gone. Just like that. And the crowd, 25,000 people, erupted. Not because they were rooting for a particular country or a particular flag. They were rooting for a young woman who was playing the kind of tennis that made you forget what you were doing and just watch. Now fast forward to late June 2026, and the Wimbledon draw takes place. This is always one of the most anticipated moments of the tennis calendar, because the draw isn't just a formality. It's a story. It's a puzzle. It determines whose path crosses whose, which grudge matches get renewed, and which dream matchups might actually happen. And this year's draw handed the tennis world something nobody had dared to hope for. Serena Williams, making her singles comeback after 4 years away from the sport, was placed in the same section of the draw as Alexandra Eala. If Serena could get through her first-round match against Maya Joint from Australia, she would almost certainly be facing Eala in the second round. Let that sink in. Serena Williams versus Alexandra Eala on the grass at Wimbledon in the second round. The story basically wrote itself. And the tennis world lost its collective mind. But before we talk about the match, we need to talk about the return. Because Serena Williams coming back to professional tennis in 2026 is one of the most audacious, jaw-dropping, conversation-stopping sporting events of the decade. She was 44 years old. She had officially stepped away from the sport in September 2022 at the US Open, in a retirement that was emotional and widely celebrated and watched by millions of people around the world. She called it evolving away from tennis, which was such a Serena thing to say. Not quitting, not retiring, evolving. She went on to focus on her businesses, her family, and her life outside the sport. For 4 years, that was the plan. And then, in June 2026, she announced she was coming back. And the world went absolutely sideways. There were people who thought it was a publicity stunt. There were people who were worried about her health and her legacy. There were people who thought it was the greatest comeback story since Muhammad Ali. And then there were young players like Alex Eala, who heard the news and felt something shift inside them. Something electric. Something like watching the impossible happen in real time. In a Tennis Channel interview, Eala talked about what it meant to be on tour at the same time as Serena. She was 17 when Serena left. She had spent her teenage years watching Serena on television, studying her movement, absorbing her mentality, dreaming about what it would be like to compete against someone like that. And now, suddenly, that someone was back. And not just back in an abstract way. Back and potentially heading toward a second-round match with Aya herself at Wimbledon. Aya said she didn't think she would ever be able to experience sharing the tour with Serena in her lifetime. And you can hear it in how she spoke about it. It wasn't the polished, calculated, media-trained answer of a cynical professional. It was the genuine, barely contained excitement of a young woman who still remembers being a teenager watching her hero on TV. She said even if she never got to interact with Serena directly, even if they never spoke, just being in the same space would be an honor she would carry for the rest of her life. She didn't think they would ever interact. She was wrong. Now let's talk about the phone call, because this is where the story really takes off. The video call was set up, by all accounts, as something relatively casual. Two players in the same draw, making contact before a potential matchup. Tennis has a long tradition of players being gracious and respectful toward each other in situations like this, and a brief chat between a legend and a rising star before a tournament seemed perfectly in keeping with that tradition. What nobody expected was what actually happened during that call. The moment Serena's face appeared on screen, Aya described feeling like she forgot how to breathe. And look, that's not hyperbole. When you have spent years looking up to someone, years studying them, years measuring yourself against the standard they set, and then they're just suddenly there, looking back at you, talking to you directly, it hits differently than you can prepare for. The call started with nervous laughter. Aya fumbled her words. Serena, who has decades of experience handling high-pressure moments with grace and composure, eased the tension. They talked about tennis. They talked about Wimbledon. They talked about the journeys that had brought them both to this point. And then Serena said something that nobody in that room, and nobody watching the clips that went viral afterward, was ready to hear. She told Aya that she had been watching her. Not in a passing, polite way. Not in the way a veteran might acknowledge a young player out of courtesy. She told her she had genuinely been paying attention, that she had seen what Aya was doing on the grass courts, and that she saw something in her that reminded her of herself at 21 years old. The greatest player in the history of women's tennis looked at a 21-year-old kid from the Philippines and said, "You remind me of me." There are moments in sport that transcend the scoreboard. There are moments that aren't about rankings or titles or prize money. They're about what it means to be seen, truly seen, by someone whose opinion carries the weight of everything you've worked toward. This was one of those moments. Aya sat there, frozen, unable to speak. And Serena kept going. She talked about the weight that Aya was carrying, the pressure of being not just a player but a symbol. Because that's what happens when you're the first. You stop being just an athlete and you start being a representative. Every Filipino fan watching her play wasn't just watching a tennis match. They were watching someone carry their hopes and their pride and their sense of what's possible. And that weight is real. It doesn't go away when you step onto the court. Sometimes it gets heavier. Serena knew this intimately. She had carried it her whole career. The weight of being not just a champion but an icon, not just a player but a pioneer. She had carried the expectations of a community that saw itself in her, that needed her to succeed because her success was their proof that they belonged in spaces that had historically said they didn't. And she told Aya that she understood it. She told her that when you carry that weight and still win, you become unstoppable. Think about what it means to hear that from Serena Williams. Not from a sports psychologist, not from a motivational speaker, not from someone whose understanding of pressure is theoretical. From someone who has lived it, who has won 23 Grand Slams while carrying it, who has been knocked down and gotten back up more times than anyone can count. And she was saying, "I see you, I know what this feels like, and you have what it takes." Aya's eyes glistened. The room was silent. And then Serena delivered one more piece of honesty that sent shockwaves through the tennis world when the clips got out. She told Aya that if they met on that court, she wasn't going to hold back. She wasn't going to go easy. She was going to bring everything she had. And she expected Aya to do the same. Now some people might read that as competitive posturing. As the veteran reminding the young player who she's dealing with. But listen more carefully to what Serena was actually saying. She wasn't trying to intimidate Aya. She was doing something far more respectful than that. She was telling her that she deserved to be treated as a real opponent, that she had earned a match where Serena would show up fully and compete with everything she had. In sports, the greatest insult is to not be taken seriously. The greatest insult is to play someone who's going through the motions, who's giving you 60%, who doesn't think you're worth their full attention. Serena was saying the opposite. She was saying, I'm going to give you my best, because you deserve my best. And then came the moment that really broke everyone who saw it. Serena said that no matter what happened on that court, win or lose, when the match was over, she was going to walk over to Eala, shake her hand, and tell her that she was the future of this sport. She said it with conviction. She said it with the kind of certainty that only comes from someone who genuinely believes what they're saying. Not as a compliment, not as a platitude, but as a statement of fact from someone who knows the sport better than almost anyone alive. You are the future of this sport. You're not just a player from the Philippines. You're a player who belongs on the biggest stage. Within hours, clips of the call were everywhere. Tennis Twitter exploded. Sports news outlets picked it up. People who barely followed tennis were sharing it. And the reactions were something to see. There were people crying. There were longtime Serena fans who said watching this made them appreciate her legacy all over again. There were Filipino fans who had been up in the middle of the night watching Eala's recent tournaments, posting videos of themselves watching the clips with tears streaming down their faces. There were young players from countries that had never produced a Grand Slam champion watching and thinking, maybe someday. Because that's what these moments do. They don't just affect the two people in the room. They ripple outward. They reach the 15-year-old in Manila hitting against a wall because she can't afford court fees. They reach the kid in Lagos or Bangkok or Lima who has been told, gently or not so gently, that tennis isn't really for people like them. And those kids see Alex Eala on that screen, hearing Serena Williams tell her she belongs on the biggest stage, and something shifts. Something becomes possible that wasn't possible before. Now let's zoom out for a second and think about what the experts were saying about the potential second-round match itself, because beyond the emotional weight of it, this would have been a fascinating tactical contest. Tracy Austin, a two-time US Open champion and one of the sharpest analysts in the game, pointed to Eala's ability to play the angles as a key factor. The slight slice on her serve, the deceptive geometry of her shots, those were the tools that had dismantled Rybakina and Svitolina. Against someone like Serena, who has seen every trick in the book, that would be put to its ultimate test. Paul Annacone, who spent years coaching Roger Federer and knows a thing or two about high-stakes tennis strategy, offered a more detailed breakdown. He identified Eala's serve as her relative weakness, and suggested that if Serena could dominate on first serve returns and dictate terms early in rallies, that was her best path to victory. But he also acknowledged that once the ball was in play, Eala's ability to handle pace and control the court would create serious problems for a player who had been away from the professional game for 4 years. And that's the thing about Serena's return that deserves honest discussion. Comeback stories are inspiring, but professional tennis is brutally unforgiving. 4 years is a long time. The game doesn't stand still while you're gone. The players are faster, the training methods are more sophisticated, the tactics have evolved. Serena is 44 years old. She is one of the greatest athletes the world has ever seen, and her willpower and competitive instinct are legendary, but the physics of the sport don't bend for legends. The question wasn't whether she could find moments of brilliance. Of course she could. The question was whether she could sustain a level of tennis against a young player at the peak of her game, a player who moves exceptionally well on grass, who handles pressure like a veteran, and who had just beaten two of the best players in the world back-to-back. It would have been one of the most compelling matches in recent memory. The sheer narrative weight of it, the legend returning after 4 years away, facing the first Grand Slam seed from the Philippines, on the grass at Wimbledon with the whole world watching, would have elevated it beyond sport into something closer to mythology. But before any of that could happen, Eala had her own business to attend to. Her first round match was against Renata Zarazua, a Mexican player who had beaten Eala before. Specifically, she had beaten her too.